The first time I saw Michael standing at the threshold, pretending to be his younger brother David, I felt the world tilt under my feet. It was supposed to be a day of mourning. The sky itself seemed draped in sorrow, gray clouds gathering above the Ward estate. Villagers trickled into the courtyard, whispers trailing behind them like shadows. Such a tragedy, some said. Michael Ward was so young, so full of promise. Others shook their heads, muttering that the Ward family had always carried a strange kind of curse. But my eyes weren't on the whispers nor the coffin, nor even on the pale lifeless body that lay inside. They were fixed on the man standing just a few paces away, red-rimmed eyes and trembling lips. Michael. My husband. Except, no one else seemed to see him as that. They looked at him and saw David Ward, the younger brother who had supposedly survived the mission gone wrong. Only I knew the truth. The man standing there wasn't David at all. It was Michael, my husband, masquerading as the very brother who now lay cold inside the wooden coffin. In my past life, I had been foolish enough to confront him the moment I realized it. I had screamed, begged, demanded answers. I had clawed at his sleeve and sobbed, "Why are you pretending? Why are you abandoning Lena and me?" He had shoved me into the freezing river and turned everyone against me. Evelyn, the so-called frail sister-in-law, had cowered behind him with crocodile tears, and my mother-in-law, Margaret, had cursed me until her voice was hoarse. I had died for that truth. But this time I would play differently. Michael's eyes swept to me just for a fraction of a second. And in that look I saw something no one else could. Relief. Guilt. Fear. He wanted me silent. "Clara," he croaked, voice breaking in just the right places. I didn't expect my brother to suddenly die." His lips trembled, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. If only I could have saved him. He was an actor playing his most dangerous role, and the audience, the entire Ward family, the villagers, the military officials, was eating it up. I let tears spill down my cheeks. I forced my voice to quiver. "David," I said softly, addressing him by the name he had stolen. "My condolences. Losing a brother is unbearable." The villagers murmured approvingly. They saw a grieving widow who was kind enough to console her brother-in-law in his time of need. Not the furious woman who wanted to tear his lies apart. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught Evelyn leaning against the doorway, one hand pressed delicately against her stomach. She looked fragile, her lips pale, her body swaying as though the grief might shatter her. Yet her eyes, those calculating, glittering eyes, met mine with a flicker of triumph. He knew. Of course she knew. The body was carried inside. David's features were eerily similar to Michael's. The same jawline, the same deep-set eyes, the same dark brows. To outsiders the confusion was natural. Brothers who could almost pass for twins. But to me, I had lived with Michael, touched his skin, memorized every scar. And there it was, the scar on the web of his hand. Long, narrow, from when he had cut himself fixing the roof tiles 3 years ago. In my past life that scar had been the very proof that shattered me. The undeniable mark that told me the man pretending to be David was actually Michael. This time I forced myself to look away, my heart pounding. No, not again. I would not expose him. The elders began whispering about funeral arrangements, about mourning rituals, about the coffin that couldn't be left out for too long. And then, with a voice that carried both urgency and eagerness, Michael stepped forward. "We should cremate the body quickly," he said. "For Michael's sake." Michael. He said his own name like it was someone else's. My husband's name, slipping from his lips as though it belonged to a stranger now. The audacity of it nearly made me laugh. I pressed a handkerchief to my lips and forced out a shaky sob. Yes, let's not delay. Let's give Michael a dignified farewell." Michael's eyes darted to me, startled. Had he expected me to resist? To wail, to cling to the coffin, to demand that the body remain untouched? That was what I had done before. That was how I had given him time to twist the truth, to paint me as hysterical. But this time I helped him bury the evidence with my own hands. I watched as he lifted the coffin with the others, his face arranged into perfect grief. My gaze locked onto his scar again, and this time I let my lips curl into the faintest of smiles. He thought he was erasing his crime, but all he was really doing was giving me the stage. Around us, the villagers whispered words of pity. "Clara? What will she do? No man left in her house." Their words sliced into me, but I did not falter. Evelyn placed a hand over her still flat belly, her lips trembling as she leaned ever so slightly into Michael's arm. "For the baby's sake," she whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "we must be strong." Michael's hand tightened around hers. He played the role of protective husband perfectly. To everyone else it looked natural. To me it was a knife twisting in my chest. But instead of screaming, instead of clawing at her hair like I once had, I simply dabbed at my eyes and lowered my gaze. Let them think I was broken. Let them think I had surrendered. Later that night, as the flames consumed the coffin, I stood in the shadows and whispered, "Rest well, David. Your brother stole your life. But I will make sure he never escapes the weight of it." The fire crackled, sparks shooting into the night sky like dying stars. Beside me, villagers sighed, shaking their heads at the tragedy. Margaret Ward, my mother-in-law, stood stiff and proud. That night, Lena tugged at my sleeve, her eyes wide and tear-filled. "Mama," she whispered, "that's Daddy. Why does everyone call him Uncle David?" My heart clenched. Even at 5 she saw the truth. Even a child could see what all the adults chose to ignore. I pulled her into my arms, pressing a kiss to her tangled hair. My voice trembled, but I forced out the words, "That's not Daddy, sweetheart. Daddy has gone far away." Her small body shuddered with sobs, and I held her tighter, vowing silently that I would never let her suffer again. This time Michael could wear his brother's face. He could play the devoted husband to Evelyn. He could let Margaret curse me and let the village spit at my feet. But I would not break. This time I was the one holding the knife in the dark. And I would wait, patiently, coldly, until the day I could plunge it straight into his lies. The morning incense had barely burned down when Margaret began her new chorus. "You're a curse, Clara Dawson," she hissed across the courtyard, her voice loud enough for every neighbor lingering by the gate to hear. Her words cut sharper than the autumn wind, but I no longer let them lodge in my skin. In my past life, each accusation had left me trembling, convinced that maybe she was right, maybe I truly was cursed. Now I only watched the way her spittle glistened on her lips as if venom lived in her blood. Beside her, Evelyn Hart leaned gracefully against the doorframe, her hand resting on her barely rounded stomach. She didn't bother pretending modesty anymore. With the household recognizing Nate as Aaron, her place was secure. "Mother Ward is right," she said sweetly, though her eyes glittered with triumph. "Clara, you couldn't even give the family a son. But she stroked her stomach with exaggerated care. "I carry the Cross family's future." The neighbors murmured their approval. A son in her belly, a title on her shoulder, and Michael, my husband, standing protectively at her side. Evelyn had the picture-perfect role she always coveted. Michael glanced at me, his gaze colder than the crematorium's steel door. "Clara, you still have the gold bracelets and earrings from your dowry. They should go to Evelyn now. A widow doesn't need such things." I stiffened. Those pieces weren't just gold. They were all I had left from my mother, who had saved her entire life to gift them to me on my wedding day. They were my anchor when loneliness first hollowed my marriage, when Michael had started drifting toward Evelyn. And now he dared, without shame, to demand I give them away. "I don't wear them," I said softly, my voice trembling just enough to sound fragile. I let my tears blur the edges of the room. "But they were my mother's last gift. I'll keep them for Lena. Surely you can understand that much." Evelyn let out a laugh as brittle as dry leaves. "For Lena? What use does a girl child have for gold? She'll marry off one day carrying someone else's name. Better to give them to me, the future mother of a son." The word son was her dagger, twisted deliberately. Michael added, "David Michael, before he died, said he left money in the house. Hand it over. We'll need it to raise the baby." I bit my lip until I tasted blood. Michael said he used his dead brother as a shield for his lies, and the neighbors nodded as though his words were gospel. I lowered my head, hiding the fury burning in my eyes. "There's no money left," I whispered hoarsely. "Michael used it long ago." A flicker of rage passed through him before he smoothed it over. He didn't like being reminded of his old name. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered that I was heartless, clinging to the household wealth. Others muttered that I was deranged, still confusing David with Michael. Their murmurs wrapped around me like icy chains, the same ones that had strangled me to death in my last life. But this time I smiled through the tears. I let them think I was weak. I let Evelyn Hart, touching her belly as though she were already crowned queen of the household. I let Michael sneer and call me a burden. Because I knew something they didn't. My plan was already in motion. That night, as Grace slept curled up against me, her small fingers clutching the edge of my sleeve, I stared at the ceiling beams and remembered the endless winter of my first life. The hunger. The cold. The humiliation of begging for scraps. The horror of watching my child starve. Never again. At dawn, I gathered my courage, tucked the death certificate into my bag and walked toward the military district office. The commander looked at me with surprise when I bowed before his desk. "Mrs. Dawson, we've already been notified of Comrade Michael Ward's death. What else brings you here?" My hands trembled slightly, but my voice was steady. "Sir, I request that his military registration be formally revoked." And I lifted my chin, meeting his eyes. "I would like to apply for a position. Any work you can give me, so I may raise my daughter without depending on the Ward family." The commander leaned back, studying me with something like respect. "Work here? It will be difficult. Demanding. And you'll have to leave your hometown. Have you thought it through?" A small smile curved my lips. "That's exactly what I want." "Yes, sir," I said firmly. "I've thought it through." As his pen scratched across the forms, my heart pounded, not with fear but with the first taste of freedom. When I returned to the Ward estate with the documents in hand, Margaret was sitting in the courtyard shelling beans, her eyes narrowing the moment she saw me. "The jinx is back," she sneered. "Running around all day instead of mourning properly. My poor son was unlucky to marry you." I ignored her, focusing instead on Lena, who was crouched on the ground peeling corn. Her tiny hands were red and blistered, raw skin stretched thin over delicate bones. Rage boiled in my chest. I rushed forward, scooping her into my arms. "She's only 5 years old. Can't you see her hands? How could you let her work like this?" Margaret planted her fists on her hips, spitting to the side. "Useless girl. You couldn't give us a grandson and now you dare talk back? You and your brat eat for free in this house. If you don't work, you don't eat." I let out a bitter laugh. "Then we'll leave. We won't take a thing from the Ward family." Her expression darkened instantly. "Leave? Who will serve Evelyn? She's pregnant with my grandson. You owe this family, Claire. Don't think you can just walk away." From the doorway, Evelyn appeared, her hands cradling her stomach, her face carefully composed in false fragility. "Surely, don't be so heartless," she said sweetly. "You couldn't give the family a son. I'm carrying the heir. Shouldn't you take care of me?" Her words sliced into me. Memories flooded back. My water breaking alone in a cold hospital corridor, Margaret calling me a disappointment for giving birth to a girl, Michael nowhere to be found. They had abandoned me then. And now they demanded my servitude. My jaw clenched. No. I won't waste another moment here. I packed our belongings that night. A small bundle of clothes, the ointment for Lena's hands, the few trinkets my late mother had left me. My fingers lingered on a worn bracelet, the only relic of her love, and I slipped it onto Lena's wrist. The following morning, with a train ticket tucked safely in my pocket, I prepared to leave. My heart hammered with equal parts fear and exhilaration. This was it. Our chance. But as soon as I stepped out the gate, Michael was there, his expression twisted with fury. His eyes zeroed in on the ticket. "Clara," he said coldly, his voice low and dangerous. "Where do you think you're going?" I tightened my grip on Lena's hand, shielding her behind me. "Where I go is none of your business, David." His jaw stiffened. A flicker of panic crossed his face before he masked it with anger. "Evelyn is pregnant. She needs someone to look after her. If you manage the house as before, there will always be a place for you here." I laughed bitterly. "Michael Ward is dead. I'm nothing but an outsider now. You have no claim on me or my daughter." Before I could move, he lunged forward and ripped the train ticket from my hand. The paper tore with a sickening rip, fragments fluttering to the ground like snowflakes. "I'm doing this for your own good," he snapped. "You're a widow with a child. How long do you think you'll survive out there? At least here you won't starve." My entire body shook with rage. I shoved him hard. "You know I'm your sister-in-law. Stay the hell away from me." Neighbors had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Why are they so close? Isn't that inappropriate? Didn't Clara already cling to him at the funeral?" Evelyn appeared, eyes wide with feigned shock. She rushed forward, her voice shrill. David! What are you doing holding her hand like that? Everyone will think, she broke off, biting her lip as though too embarrassed to finish. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Their eyes turned to me, filled with disgust. Michael seized the chance. Pointing at me, he shouted, "She's confused. He keeps calling me Michael." She begged me not to leave her, saying she can't live without a man. When I refused, she slapped me. My heart plummeted. His lies were identical to the ones that had ruined me before. Evelyn clung to his arm, tears spilling down her cheeks. She's trying to steal my husband right after her own died. How shameless can you be? The villagers gasped, muttered, shook their heads. No wonder. I always thought she looked too desperate. A widow stirring up trouble. Disgraceful. Lena burst from behind me, her little face red with fury. She shoved Evelyn aside and wrapped her arms tightly around my waist. That's not true. My mama didn't do anything wrong. Uncle wouldn't let us leave. Michael let out a mocking laugh. See? She's already teaching her daughter to lie. What's next? Making her call me father. Lena's eyes filled with tears. You're not my daddy. Mommy said daddy's gone. I pulled her close, my eyes burning as I stared Michael down. I'm done arguing with you. Just let us go. But Evelyn screeched, lunging at me with claws bared. You seduce my man and think you can walk away? Not until you give me an explanation. Her nails slashed toward my face. I stumbled back, then she deliberately threw herself to the ground, clutching her stomach and screaming. She pushed me. She tried to hurt the baby. The crowd erupted in outrage. Margaret stormed from the house, her face contorted with fury. Pigs. You killed my son and now you want to kill my grandson too? Get out. Get out of this house. My passbook spilled from my bag as she tore it open. Michael snatched it up, his eyes gleaming. So this is why you're leaving? Hiding money from us all along? This belongs to my brother. I lunged, desperate. That's the survivor's compensation. It was given to me and my daughter. But before I could snatch it back, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the chaos. I'm the one who approved that compensation. Is there a problem here? The crowd froze. The commander strode into the yard, flanked by uniformed guards. His cold eyes swept over the scene. The funds are for the widow and child of Comrade Michael Ward. No one else has the right to touch them. Michael's face blanched. Evelyn's hand slipped from his arm. Margaret's wails faltered. And I stood straighter, Lena pressed to my side as the shackles of the Ward family finally began to crack. Silence fell so fast it seemed to clatter and break on the flagstones. Michael's grip on my passbook loosened. The little red booklet slid from his fingers and bumped against his boot. Pick it up, the commander said, not to me but to a young guard at his shoulder. Return it to Mrs. Miller. The guard did as told and placed the booklet in my palm with two hands, respectful, like handing back someone's name. I curled my fingers around it and felt my lungs finally draw a full breath. The funds were granted to the spouse and child of Comrade Michael Ward, the commander continued, turning a level gaze on Margaret and Evelyn. No one else has any right to them. No one else has any right to her. Michael opened his mouth because he always opened his mouth, but the commander raised a hand and the attempt died in his throat. Mr. Ward, he said evenly, using the name Michael had tried to bury. I've now heard the scene outside this gate twice. Once is a misunderstanding. Twice is a pattern. If you harass this widow and her daughter again, you will answer for it. Do I make myself clear? Michael swallowed. Commander, Do I make myself clear? Michael stared at the commander's ribbons instead of his eyes. Yes. The commander nodded once. Good. Then he turned to me. The hardness in his expression softened by a degree. Mrs. Miller, you made a formal application to accept a civilian posting in the district, and it has been approved. Pack what belongs to you. You and your daughter will come with us now. Now. I echoed. The word wobbled. Lena tightened her arms around my waist like a belt. Now, he said. You've been left to the weather long enough. Behind us, Margaret found her tongue and her fury. You can't just take her. She married into this family. A glance from the commander silenced her. No one owns a person, he said almost gently, and then to his men, give them 10 minutes. I already had packed everything. In the courtyard, Evelyn made a little sound, a plaintive, well-rehearsed note. Clara, she said as if we were sisters after all, don't be angry. It isn't good for the baby when I'm upset. I slipped the strap of the cloth bag over my shoulder. Then don't upset yourself, I said and walked past her. We climbed into the back of the olive truck, the canvas sides rolling down with a rattle. As the engine coughed, the commander rapped the tailgate twice with his knuckles. The truck lurched forward. Through a slice of canvas I watched the ward gate shrink until it was only a notch in the wall of my old life, and then even that was gone. Lena pressed her face to my shoulder. Are we really going, Mama? For always. For always, I whispered into her hair. For always. The military district didn't smell like grief. It smelled like machine oil and steamed rice and chalk dust. The fences were tall, the paths were straight. People moved with purpose. No one had time to stare. We were taken first to administration to sign papers. My name, my daughter's, the square characters marching in order across clean lines. The administrative clerk wore a blue cardigan and a pin of a tiny lily. She spoke to me the way people do when they think you might break if they're not careful. You'll be in building 3, she said. 4th floor, room 407. Shared washroom, hot water at 6 and 9. These are your meal coupons for the week. Your posting is in the accounts section, finance office. Accounts, I repeated like a word I wanted to taste. Can you handle ledgers? I can add and make it balance, I said and thought of marketplace bills I'd kept in my head, of ration slips counted twice because once is how you get cheated. I will learn what I don't know. She smiled. That tends to be the right answer. The commander didn't vanish after depositing us. He walked us up 4 flights himself, slow enough that Lena could count the landings. The key turned in a scrape and the door swung open on a small room with whitewashed walls, a narrow metal bed, another bed folded against the wall like a promise, a desk with a ring of water stain. Dust motes turned in the light like pale fish. It's not grand, the commander said, but it is yours. The word caught somewhere between my ribs and my throat. I put our bag on the desk and smoothed the sheet with my palm. It smelled faintly of sunshine. Lena hopped from the threshold to the window and back again, her footsteps a soft drum. Reporting tomorrow at 8, the commander said. He did not look at the bruised yellow on my wrist. He did not ask how I got it. If anyone gives you difficulty, you come to me through your supervisor. You do not handle it alone. Yes, Commander. He gave a short, satisfied nod, then saw himself out, leaving behind the rectangular quiet of official buildings and the smaller, rounder quiet that comes when you close the door on people who wish you ill. I sat on the bed and the mattress springs sighed. The urge to cry arrived the way rain does, all at once and from everywhere. I pulled Lena into my lap and we let it come. Her tears were hot, mine were almost cool. When we were done, we washed our faces in the little enamel basin and laughed at how swollen our eyes looked in the mirror. That night we ate in the canteen. Metal trays clattered against the rail. A woman in a scarf ladled rice like she meant it. A hill, not a mean scoop. Then slid 2 slices of stewed potato and a spoonful of greens onto my tray. Take a boiled egg for the girl, she said, half whispering, half scolding. She's birds thin. It's not on our coupons, I said. Then you'll owe me a favor, she said and winked. Lena peeled the egg at the table with scientific care, pieces of shell like pale confetti. He pushed half into my hand. You first. I shook my head. You earned it. She ate with the ferocity of small children and people too long denied. I watched her throat move and thought, peace tastes like this, warm, simple enough. The accounts section smelled of carbon paper and pencil shavings. A row of desks, a row of backs. On the wall, a clock that needed no one's permission. A woman with a severe bun and kind eyes introduced herself as Supervisor May. You'll start on petty cash reconciliation and ration coupon tallies, she said, placing 3 ledgers in front of me. This is the abacus we use. You can practice on yesterday's receipts. If you need help, ask. If you make an error, own it and correct it. Yes, ma'am. Not ma'am, she said. Supervisor will do. I ran my fingers over the abacus beads and the muscle memory startled me. My father's market stall, my mother's voice. Again until the beads were as familiar as prayers. The numbers on the page didn't look like a trap. They looked like something I could choose. By mid-morning my columns lined up, decimals behaving, beads sliding in neat clicks. The quiet of the office was a different kind of quiet than the storage room had held. No one hissed. No one watched me for the pleasure of seeing me flinch. Papers went from one stack to another. Work began and then, astonishingly, ended. At noon, Supervisor May stood by my desk. "You work like a woman who's had to count every grain." "That's a compliment." "I'll take it as one." She tilted her head. "Your daughter, Lena? There's a primary school on the south side of the compound. We can place her as a temporary student while we process the residence forms. Children should be where mornings make sense." "Thank you," I said, and meant it so fully it almost hurt. That afternoon after shift, we found the school. A low building with posters in the windows and two plane trees bending toward each other like parents conferring. The headmistress looked over the form, over me, over Lena, and nodded. "She can start Monday. She may sit in on the reading circle tomorrow if she wants. It helps to start by listening." On the walk back, Lena's hand swung in mine like a pendulum. "Will there be a library?" she asked. "A small one," I said. "Do they let you take the books home?" "We'll ask." He squeezed my fingers. "I think I will like listening." I met him 3 days later, which seems fast now that the rest of my life has slowed to a reasonable pace. The corridor outside accounts was dim at 4 o'clock, light pooling under doors. I came out balancing a stack of requisition forms and almost collided with a man carrying a wooden crate of typewriter ribbons. The top sheet of my stack fluttered loose and skittered across the tiles like a fish. We both lunged. His hand found the paper first. Mine landed over his. "Sorry," we said together, and then we both laughed because the word came out exactly the same way from two different throats. He straightened and offered the page back. "Clara Dawson?" He read from the corner stamp. "You sign like you mean it." I blinked at him, breath snagging for a fraction of a second on recognition. Doesn't memory play tricks when it decides to be kind? Same eyes, steadier somehow. Same small crescent scar near the eyebrow from when a chalkboard fell during night school, and he laughed through the sting. "Adrian," I said. "Adrian Wells?" He grinned. "I thought it was you. I was going to risk it and say your name and then pretend I was calling to someone else if I was wrong." "Still a coward," I said before I could stop myself. "Still unforgiving," he shot back, but his eyes were warm. He tilted the crate a little. "Supply office for my sins. You. Accounts. That tracks. Does it? You always made the numbers sit up straight." He glanced at the requisitions in my hands. "Do you need these stamped?" "Supplies the wrong desk. Logistics is 2 doors down." "I'll figure it out," I said. "You will," he agreed. "But," he tipped his head at my stack. "Not with that form. Logistics wants the blue carbon copy. You've got the black." I didn't know there were 2. "There are 3. The third is yellow for the person who files things no one ever reads." He set his crate down and pulled a blue form from his folio, slid it onto my stack. "You can owe me a favor. I'm collecting favors this week, apparently." "Spend them," he said, and hefted his crate. "Also, there's a jam in your office window latch. If you're on the 4th floor west, you'll roast by noon. I can fix it with a screwdriver and bad words." I should have said no. The words sat ready. Instead, I heard myself say, "After shift? After shift." I walked back to accounts with the blue form on top and a ridiculous lightness between my shoulder blades. Supervisor May eyed the stack and the color and lifted an eyebrow. "Efficient," she said. I had help. "Keep friends who keep ledgers," she said. "They notice when numbers go missing." After shift, Adrian turned up with a dented toolbox and the kind of carefulness men use when they're determined not to make a woman feel cornered. He propped the window, adjusted the latch, swore once under his breath in a way that made Lena giggle from where she sat drawing in the corner, and then tested the swing of the sash. "There," he said, standing back. "Now it sticks only when it's supposed to." "Like a good rule," I said. He glanced at Lena's picture, 3 crooked trees and a square building and 2 figures holding hands. "Is that us?" he asked her. She considered. "It can be," she decided. He left us a small toolkit. A little screwdriver, 2 nails, a coil of string. "Borrowed," he said. "Someone should have something at hand." "Thank you," I said. He shrugged like it was nothing and then didn't hover. He never hovered. It was the first thing I noticed and the thing I never stopped being grateful for. Quiet support looks like a dozen small mercies you don't have to ask for. A week later, a folded booklet of reading primers appeared on our desk at home. Discarded, the note said in a neat engineer's hand. But readable. The next day, Lena brought home a story about a rabbit who learned not to brag and read it aloud twice, halting only over the word consequence, which we turned into a game until it became a pet we could both call. At the canteen on a wet Thursday, Adrian slid 2 extra coupons across the table without ceremony and with less eye contact than a shy cat. "Sugar," he said. "For fever if it comes. Or for tea if it doesn't." When I tried to slide them back, he shook his head. "Supply is arithmetic," he said. "It all balances." On a morning when the sky drew chalk lines of tiredness under my eyes, he wordlessly set a thermos near my ledger. Weak tea, just enough sugar to make the day bend instead of break. He always left before I could say too much. He always returned whatever ground I hadn't offered. Supervisor May noticed, of course. Older women always notice. "Is he yours?" she asked once, not nosy, just calibrating. "No," I said, and felt how the word didn't sting. "He's here." "Here is what most women need first," she said. "After that we can talk about poetry." I didn't want poetry. Not then. Here was enough. One evening, the sky went the color of a bruise and the wind smelled like rain that hadn't yet made up its mind. On the bulletin board by the stairwell, someone had pinned a notice about a Saturday book exchange. Bring one, take one. And beside it a flyer for a gardening circle that met behind Building 5, where someone's grandmother had convinced the soil to listen. Lena and I stopped. "A library," she whispered, reverent. "A small one," I said, smiling. "But small things grow." We brought 2 battered paperbacks, bartered for a primer with a red cover and a slim volume of poems where the lines sat with their legs crossed, thinking. Lena chose a book about a sparrow who wanted to be brave. She read the first page on the stairs, one finger under each word as if words might run off without a leash. Adrian passed us then, hands full of coiled rope, and tipped his chin at the wall of notices. "They're starting a sewing circle on Thursdays," he said to the air between us. "I heard the woman who runs it knows how to turn curtains into dresses." "I have more need of dresses than curtains," I said. He considered. "Most people do when it comes to walking out the door." We all looked down at Lena's shoes, which were scuffed but less scuffed than before. She wiggled her toes. "My feet are not curtains," she informed us solemnly, and we both laughed in the same surprised way we had in the corridor with the flying requisition form. After he left, Lena tilted her head at me. "He's nice." "He is," I said. Nice is not a word I'd trusted for a long time. Suddenly it felt like the right size. "Is he a friend?" "He's here," I said again, because it was still the truest thing I knew. At work the numbers kept behaving. I learned where to store the petty cash tin so it stopped humming for attention. I learned Supervisor May preferred errors to be circled in red and corrected in green, the way a map shows a river and then a bridge over it. I learned that if I took the long corridor to the canteen I'd pass the window of the nursery, where Lena and the other small ones sometimes spent an hour in the afternoons painting with water on slates. Their strokes vanished as they dried, which seems like a poor metaphor until you remember that not every mark needs to be permanent to matter. Sometimes I thought of the ward courtyard and the way voices had risen there, scaled like fish, how I'd stood with my shoulders up around my ears to try to catch the words before they hit me. Here the voices had measure. When someone raised theirs, the room raised its eyebrows until the tone came back down. Once in the late afternoon the commander stopped by accounts. He made no speeches, only a nod at the ledgers and a question about whether the new ration coupons printed clearly. "They do," I said. "The figures don't smudge." "Good," he said. "Clarity is one of the few courtesies we can promise." He asked after Lena as if that were also his jurisdiction. When I told him she had read Sparrow without prompting, he made a pleased sound somewhere in his chest and left it at that. At night in our small room the sound of other people's lives traveled thinly through the walls. Someone laughing over a card game, the thunk of a shoe dropped carelessly, a baby's brief outraged complaint, and then the hush that follows a held, patted back. We slept in a bed that didn't belong to anyone's hatred. In the morning I woke and my first thought was not how to endure, but what time is my shift? That change felt as radical as any revolution I'd heard people argue about in markets. On a Sunday we went to the market outside the gates. I held the passbook in my pocket and did not have to touch it. We came home with a handful of scallions, a small jar of salt, and 3 peaches wrapped in paper like secrets. I cut one and the juice ran into my palms, sweet and slightly stubborn. Lena ate hers over the basin and licked her wrist where the river of sugar turned into a map. We were walking back under the plane trees when we passed a group from the compound. 2 clerks from logistics, a man from motor pool, a woman from medical in a white coat tied at her waist. Someone made a joke about numbers. Someone else made a joke about how the joke wasn't funny. I saw the moment the conversation took its old turn. The one where women become cautionary tales told by men who need to hear themselves. That widow in Building 3, one clerk said, the kind of voice that likes to see what it can get away with. They say she clung to her brother-in-law. Sad, but you know how some people are. Before the old version of me could brace, Adrian's voice came in easy as dusk. What I know, he said, is that gossip is bad math. Add enough of it and you never get to the truth. You just bury it under a pile of numbers that don't belong. The clerk made a sound to cover his retreat. The group's interest slid off me like rain off canvas. We kept walking. I didn't say thank you, he didn't look back to see if I would. I told myself it didn't matter and then felt traitorously how much it did. The military district became my refuge. Every morning I walked Lena to school, her small hand clutching mine, her steps light and eager. Every evening I returned to the accounts office, where the smell of ink and paper replaced the stench of the Ward household. For the first time in years I tasted peace. But peace has a way of drawing out envy. It began with glimpses. A shadow at the corner of the barracks. A figure standing just beyond the ration queue. At first I told myself I was imagining things. Trauma makes ghosts where none exist. But one evening as I carried Lena home from school, he stepped into the light. Michael. He was thinner than before, his uniform rumpled, his face drawn. But his eyes, those sharp predatory eyes, still gleamed with a possessive fire. Clara, he said softly as though we were lovers meeting in secret. Finally. I've been waiting. Lena whimpered and clung to me. My own heartbeat thundered, but I forced my voice steady. You shouldn't be here. Leave before you disgrace yourself further. He smiled faintly, stepping closer. You're upset. I understand. It's confusing, I know. You think I'm David. But I'm Michael. I had to do it, for Evelyn, for the family. You'll see in time it was for the best. My skin crawled. You disgust me. Neighbors turned their heads at the raised voices. I took a deep breath and let the words fall, sharp and loud. You are David Ward, my late husband's brother. Nothing more. Don't you dare call yourself Michael in front of me again. Gasps rippled through the small gathering crowd. Michael's jaw tightened, but he reached for me anyway. Stop this act. You're my wife. Come home with me. I stepped back, shielding Lena. I will never go anywhere with you. You're not my husband. My husband is dead. The words hung in the air like a bell tolling. Michael's face twisted, rage flashing across his features. He lunged forward, but a firm hand gripped his arm, yanking him back. The commander stood there, his expression cold as steel. What's going on here? Michael straightened instantly, plastering on a smile. Sir, forgive the disturbance. She confuses me with my brother sometimes. It's grief, nothing more. I laughed bitterly. Grief? Or guilt? I turned to the commander. This man is not David Ward. He is Michael Ward. He's been lying since the day of the funeral. A murmur ran through the gathering soldiers and clerks. The commander's eyes narrowed. Before Michael could respond, another voice rang out. She's hysterical. Evelyn appeared, her hand resting dramatically on her rounded belly. Clara hasn't accepted her loss. He still calls Michael by the wrong name. She needs compassion, not punishment. Her tone dripped with false sympathy, but her slip did not go unnoticed. Michael, the commander repeated sharply. Evelyn froze, her face draining of color. I meant David. Of course, David. But it was too late. Margaret came bustling forward, her face flushed with fury. Don't listen to her. She's always trying to stir up trouble. My son gave up everything for this family. If he has to take on David's name to protect Evelyn and the baby, then so be it. The words tumbled out before she could stop herself. The crowd gasped again. The commander's eyes turned to ice. So it's true. Michael's facade crumbled. His voice rose, wild and desperate. I had no choice. If David was gone, Evelyn would have been left with nothing. What was I supposed to do? Let her suffer? I took his place for the good of the family. For honor. Honor. I spat. You desecrated your brother's name to cover your affair. You destroyed me with your lies. Don't you dare speak of honor. He turned on me, his eyes blazing. You think you're better than me? You would have died without us. You needed me, Clara. You still need me. The commander stepped between us. Enough. You have impersonated a fallen officer, forged records, and slandered an innocent woman. You will be reported, stripped of rank and detained for investigation. Michael's face went white. He staggered back, shaking his head. No, you can't. I am David. I am. But no one listened anymore. The soldiers closed in, their grips iron as they dragged him away. Evelyn screamed, clinging to him, but he shoved her off in his panic. Margaret wailed, cursing everyone in sight, but the curses sounded hollow now. I held Lena tightly as she buried her face in my neck. My own body trembled, not with fear but with release. For the first time, Michael's lies had cracked wide open for all to see. As they hauled him away, his voice echoed down the corridor. Clara, you're mine. You'll never escape me. But I knew better. His empire of lies was crumbling. And I was no longer his prisoner. That night, in the quiet of my small room, I sat at my desk, Lena asleep beside me. My hands shook as I lit the lamp. For so long I had been the silent one, enduring humiliation in the shadows. But not anymore. Michael had been unmasked. News travels fast in the district. Within days of Michael's arrest, whispers swirled through the market stalls, the canteen, the schoolyard. The great Ward family liars. The elder son impersonating his dead brother. The widow vindicated. For once, the whispers were not knives aimed at my back. They were arrows striking the very people who had destroyed me. Still, I told myself not to listen. Their ruin was not my goal. My goal was freedom for me and Lena. Yet when justice unfolds before your eyes, it is impossible not to watch. The first fracture came with the baby. Evelyn gave birth on a stormy night, the thunder rattling the very windows of my new quarters. A week later, I overheard the soldiers gossiping outside the accounts office. It's a girl, one said. Weak lungs, barely cries. A disappointment, another muttered. They wanted a son to restore their standing. I closed the ledger in front of me, my hands steady, though inside memories stirred. Evelyn had once flaunted her swelling belly like a badge of triumph. She had whispered poison in my ear. He chose me, not you, because I can give him what you can't. And yet life had its own way of balancing scales. Margaret's fury was inevitable. She's useless, she screamed, her voice carrying through the village one morning as I walked Lena to school. All this scheming, all this disgrace, and for what? A sickly girl. Evelyn's answering shriek was laced with venom. Don't you dare blame me. If your son hadn't been a coward, none of this would have happened. Their words tumbled through the open window, raw and savage. The villagers gathered outside, snickering. Once those same neighbors had jeered at me, throwing scraps and insults. Now they laughed at Margaret and Evelyn, clawing at each other like wild dogs. I held Lena's hand tightly as we passed. She looked up at me with wide eyes. Mama, why are they fighting? I smiled faintly. Because lies never last, my love. Sooner or later they tear themselves apart. Michael was released under guard weeks later, but not as a free man. He had been stripped of his uniform, his false honors ripped away. The once proud commander now wore plain clothes that hung loose on his frame. I saw him once across the market square. His eyes darted wildly, his lips moving without sound. When he noticed me, he stumbled forward, reaching out. Clara, he whispered hoarsely. Tell them I'm David. You know it's true. You know. I stepped back, my voice calm but unyielding. You're Michael. Nothing more. And I owe you nothing. He froze as if struck. Then he began to laugh, high, broken, terrifying. The villagers scattered, muttering. From that day on, Michael wandered the streets muttering to himself, chasing shadows. Sometimes he shouted Evelyn's name. Sometimes he cursed Margaret. Sometimes he called out for me, his voice ragged with desperation. But I no longer feared him. I pitied him. Evelyn, once the delicate flower he had sacrificed everything for, withered under the weight of disgrace. The villagers mocked her, some spitting at her feet, others refusing to sell her food. Without Michael's false rank, without Margaret's control, She was just another fallen woman clutching a sickly child. One evening I heard that the baby had died. A fever untreated. Evelyn's wail split the night, a sound so raw it silenced even the most hardened gossips. But my heart did not soften. I thought of my own Lena, once locked in a livestock shed, hungry and terrified, while Evelyn smirked from the safety of Michael's arms. Justice was not always gentle. Margaret's end came soon after. She had always been a woman of iron, sharp-tongued, unyielding, determined to control the world through spite alone. But iron once rusted crumbles. One afternoon, in the middle of yet another tirade against Evelyn, she collapsed, clutching her chest. Some said it was rage that felled her. Others claimed it was shame. By nightfall, Margaret Ward was dead. When the news reached me, I felt no triumph. Only a quiet, inevitable closure. The woman who had cursed me, who had called my daughter a jinx and shoved us into the cold, was gone. The chains she had once wrapped around my neck had turned to dust. And so, the Ward family, once so proud, so cruel, disintegrated. Evelyn vanished, some said returning to distant relatives who would never welcome her. Michael became a mad vagrant, wandering the streets in tatters, muttering his false name to anyone who would listen. Margaret lay in the ground, her bitterness buried with her. I stood apart from it all, holding Lena's hand as we walked home under the setting sun. The air smelled of autumn leaves, crisp and clean. For the first time I felt the world had been washed of the filth that once stained it. "Are you sad, Mama?" Lena asked softly. I looked down at her, her bright eyes, her innocent trust. "No, my love. Not sad. Just free." That night I lit a single candle at my window. Not for the Wards, not for their memory which I wanted erased, but for myself. For the woman I had been, broken and lost. For the woman I was becoming, steady and unafraid. Their collapse was not my victory. My victory was simply this: I had survived them. And now, with Lena by my side, I would build something new. The Ward family was gone, scattered like ashes on the wind. Evelyn had vanished after her child's death, swallowed by the shame she had once tried to inflict on me. Margaret lay buried in the cold ground, her voice of poison silenced at last. Michael, broken and stripped of his lies, wandered the streets a hollow ghost, muttering to himself, clinging to an identity that no longer existed. For years they had ruled my every breath, dictating when I ate, when I spoke, when I dared to smile. For years their cruelty had defined me. But now, when I woke each morning to the light streaming through my little window, I felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Something weightless. Freedom. Work at the accounts office became more than a livelihood. It became a kind of salvation. The ledgers that once seemed tedious now felt like maps to stability. Columns of numbers obeyed my hand, the world of ration coupons and salaries bending into order. Each day I stamped reports and submitted balances, and each evening Supervisor May would nod her approval. "You are reliable," she told me once, a rare smile softening her severe face. "Not many can be trusted with accuracy. You will go far here." Her words filled me with quiet pride. For so long I had been told I was worthless, a burden. Now my worth was proven daily in ink and numbers. At lunch, my coworkers sometimes invited me to sit with them, sharing rice bowls and stories of their families. I was still learning to laugh easily, but Lena's joy spilled into me, softening the edges of my reserve. Slowly I began to belong. And Lena, oh, Lena blossomed. No longer locked away, no longer shamed, she grew into herself like a flower freed from stone. Each afternoon she ran to me after school, waving her notebooks. "Mama, look. I got full marks on my dictation." Or, "Mama, the teacher said I read the fastest in class." Her cheeks glowed with pride, her eyes shining with confidence. Sometimes she would tug Adrian's sleeve when we met him in the square. "Uncle Adrian, did you know I can multiply now?" And Adrian, with his steady patience, would crouch down and say, "Show me. I want to see." She would rattle off numbers and he would nod, eyes warm. "You're just like your mother. Sharp as a blade." My heart always ached at those moments, not with pain but with something gentler, fuller. Gratitude. Adrian became a quiet fixture in our lives. He never forced his presence, never demanded attention. Instead he appeared in small, steady ways. When Lena's shoes wore thin, he found her a sturdier pair from surplus stock. "Discarded by supply," he said with a shrug, though I suspected he had bought them. When the latch on our door jammed, he oiled it without asking. When I stayed late at the office, bent over ledgers, he sometimes appeared at my desk with a thermos of hot tea. "Don't forget to drink," he would murmur before returning to his own work. It was in those quiet moments, more than grand gestures, that trust rooted itself. One evening, Lena had fallen asleep on my lap, her head heavy against me as we sat under the lamplight. Adrian lingered by the doorway, hesitant. "You've changed," he said softly. I tilted my head. "Have I?" "Yes." His gaze held mine. The Clara I knew in school was bright but cautious. Always ready to yield even when she was right. The Clara I see now, she doesn't yield anymore. I smiled faintly. "Suffering has a way of sharpening you." He nodded. After a pause he added, "I'm glad you survived it." The words struck something deep within me. I lowered my gaze, brushing Lena's hair from her forehead. "So am I." Seasons turned. Winter snow gave way to spring blossoms, then to the heavy heat of summer. With each passing month, the distance between my past and present widened, until the wards felt like little more than shadows in a bad dream. And yet, sometimes at night I would sit awake and remember the years of humiliation, the hunger, the endless cruelty. My hands would clench, my chest tightening. One such night I stepped outside to breathe. Adrian was there, leaning against the railing, the glow of his cigarette ember flaring in the dark. "Can't sleep?" he asked. I shook my head. "The past doesn't always stay buried." He was silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "The past shapes us. But it doesn't have to chain us." I looked at him, the smoke curling between us, and something shifted inside me. For years I had defined myself as widow, victim, survivor. But maybe I could simply be Claire again. The day came when Lena's teacher invited me to her school performance. She stood on stage, reciting a poem with clarity and confidence, her little voice carrying through the hall. My eyes blurred with tears, but they were not tears of grief. They were tears of arrival. I felt Adrian's presence beside me, steady and sure. When the applause thundered and Lena bowed, I turned to him, smiling through my tears. "She's free," I whispered. "So are you," he replied. And for the first time I believed it. One evening after supper, Lena skipped ahead of us, her laughter ringing down the street. Adrian and I walked side by side, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Clara," he said suddenly. I turned. His eyes were steady, but his hands twisted nervously. "I don't want to intrude. I don't want to rush. But I need you to know, if ever you're ready, I'd like to walk beside you. Not as a friend only, but as a partner. Someone you can lean on if you'll have me." My breath caught. For years, love had been a poisoned word, tangled with betrayal. But here it was offered not as a demand, not as a chain, but as a choice. I looked at Lena, chasing fireflies ahead of us, her laughter floating back. Then I looked at Adrian, solid, kind, patient. "I can't promise quickly," I whispered. "But I can promise honestly." His smile was small, but it reached his eyes. "That's all I'll ever ask." And so the three of us walked forward. Me, my daughter, and the man who had waited without asking, who had offered without taking. The shadows of betrayal lay behind us, swallowed by time and justice. Ahead lay something I had never dared to dream of. A life chosen, not forced. I was Clara Dawson. Widow, survivor, mother. And now reborn. The past was no longer my cage. It was my foundation. And on it I would build a future filled not with fear but with love, dignity, and peace. The end.